Welcome back to another video, guys. So this one, I decided to go over, well, not necessarily go over. I wanted to touch on a book that I haven't read in a while. It's been at least a year since I've read this book, but this is a book that really helped improve my financial situation and financial behavior when I was down in Dallas, and lived there for at least a few years, and I was trying to just figure things out and get my life together and all that stuff. And there are multiple tips in this book. This book, I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's one of those books that at one point everyone started talking about on social media and it blew up and all that stuff. And as much of a reader as I am, I tend not to read actual books like that. I like to read articles. I always have. But books is I'm very bad because I'm one of those readers that will read a book or reread a book and then I drop it because something else caught my attention, or I keep buying books and they just pile up and I don't touch them for Lord knows how long until I do. And even then, it's a question if I'm gonna actually finish it directly or not. It's a whole thing. But this book is The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clayson. I'm assuming is how you pronounce his last name. Supposed to be one of the best books ever written when it comes to wealth, certain behaviors to implement into just your like financial management. Because a lot of people apparently have bad money habits. I'm not going to go over this whole book, but the one tip, because this touches on a few things as far as investing, paying yourself first, which is pretty much the tip I want to touch on, invest in real estate, a bunch of stuff. A lot of things I haven't been able to put into action yet because I'm still growing. Some of those things are in the plans for down the line, but there's one tip that I was able to implement right away that hasn't completely shifted my life upside down, but definitely has helped and has saved me a couple different times when money was a problem, more of a problem at least. And it's the tip, like I said, of the book saying pay yourself first whenever you get paid. If you don't know what that means, like you have to keep in mind the nature of today and how our money is quickly just spread all about. Like as soon as you get paid, your rent automatically hits. That's most likely going to take up basically your entire check. If you had just one check and it had to go to any bill, if it's rent, basically your whole check is gone these days. If you aren't going after rent and you got utilities, it'll still take a serious bite out of that, probably a few hundred at least between Wi-Fi, which if you work from home, that used to be considered a luxury, especially by old people standards. But now if you work from home, like Wi-Fi is mandatory, which means electricity is also mandatory. Something else that was considered a luxury, but if you had to be a little finicky with your money, then electricity you could do without to some degree as long as you had the roof over your head. But now that if you work from home like I do, electricity as well as Wi-Fi mandatory. Of course, rent or mortgage is mandatory. So you have more places that your money has to go to, right? So when it comes to that tip that this book brought up of paying yourself first, it specifically says whatever your take home pay is, whatever your check is, in this case, modern day, however much lands into your bank account, 10% of that, put that away and essentially save it. Don't touch it. That 10% is paying yourself because that's money that's not automatically assigned to just any other bill or what's the word? Liability, I guess. What I ended up doing, I took that initial advice, and whenever I would get paid, especially when I was working a contract where I got paid weekly, 10% of that money would be put into the savings account that I rarely used. And that same institution that my accounts are based in, I was using that checking account and I had a savings account I was barely using. And so 10%, I would set up my paychecks to be deposited. 10% will automatically shift to the savings account and I usually wouldn't touch it. And then everything else I would use however I needed to for groceries, utilities, rent, and whatnot. What I ended up doing, it changed over time. One particular thing, and I think most people do this these days. It would surprise me if this wasn't the case. But I if you haven't done it, one thing I would recommend to kind of build on that tip is to not only have your savings account and your checking account in the same bank. I would make it a point, as I've done, to get a savings account that through a different institution that you like, preferably get an APY account or high yielding savings account, if that's even really a thing these days, which I think they are. The rates started going back up some time ago, but I don't know how close they are compared to what they once were. But I would find an institution that has a percentage of an APY that's, comfortable for you, 5%, 6%, 4%. I know one institution was like that at one point when the rates were dropping. I don't know if they've increased, but find an institution that has a high yielding savings account with an APY, annual percentage yield, basically the amount of interest the bank would pay you every month once you divvy it up. Find one that you like and create a savings account only that you're not meant to touch. You can still access it for emergencies, so connect it to your main checking account and stuff like that. I would completely separate your regular spending checking account from this savings account where you put 10 or even more percent of your income of your check every time, and just let that build up. And that's done wonders for me, because even though now that I'm back home, so a lot of my expenses have been reduced. A lot of my money, like, I feel like every time I get paid, I'm broke. Like, I don't know where my money is going. But what I've done is I'll take whatever check that I'm being sent from my job. It automatically splits between a few different accounts. One of them being that bank where I only have a savings account, there's no checking account. And I believe it's still at 10%. I think still 10% of my check gets deposited into that, but I never see it. I never get a notification of it. I can check the account anytime, but because it's basically out of sight, out of mind. So whenever I check it, I'm usually surprised by how high it is. I did dabble or touch it like one big time because of a crazy expense. So I broke that rule, but I can fix that later. This just came to mind because I actually checked this account recently and it was higher than I thought. I was actually surprised that the money that I took out before I already made back. I already took that 10%. It goes in that other account. Then you have my main spending account. Something else that I like to do, because I like to keep just straight cash on me at any given time. I don't like to be too reliable on the whole electronic money system, especially if we're heading towards a future where supposedly we might have to get chips inserted. And if you're religious, you know what I'm getting at, because supposedly Elon Musk in particular wants to push us to that type of future. I think he already had like some technology that's supposed to go in your brain and like alter your view of reality. It's supposed to be kind of like a essentially like a AR thing where you get a chip implant in your brain and now you can answer phone calls and a bunch of other stuff. Futuristic, dystopian stuff you see in fantasy, sci-fi stuff. I ain't doing that. But basically, I like to keep cash on me at all times. That way, if places don't accept cards for whatever reason, if my cards are no good, if we run out of power or power goes out, what have you, or just one thing that happened years ago, some of my homies and I were still in college. I think we were driving it was either from Virginia to Maryland or vice versa. And we hit a checkpoint and they needed $20. And at the time, I didn't have any cash left on me. I've always liked to keep cash on me, but this was one time I got caught lacking. And one of my homeboys, he had a 20 on him in his wallet, and we were able to use that to get through because the checkpoint didn't allow us to use cards. So, little situations like that. And what I've done is I will take far more than 10% of my pay out of my account when I get paid. And I usually don't touch my cash regardless. So what it ends up doing is it makes me feel like I'm broke all the time. And it's like, I don't know where all my money is going. I don't know why within a matter of days of me getting paid, I feel like my account's empty. I had to pay whatever bills. My car note hit automatically. I got to pay for groceries and whatever other things I use to keep my health in check, because I'm really big on that right now and all that stuff. And it's like, where the heck is my money going? Not realizing some of it's being put in a whole separate account that is not meant to be touched, out of sight, out of mind. The money moves every week at that. It's a weekly deposit. I don't hear anything from it. So when my one main account is low, I'm like, where the heck is the money going? And then I check that account once in a blue moon. And I'm like, that's where it goes. So now there have been times in the past where I've been able to lean on that account. And let's say I wouldn't have been able to take care of rent by myself, but I've been able to clear 1+ more like months of rent just off of that, or at the very least, I was able to take like half of the cash that I had on hand, get the other half from that account that I was saving in the cut, and that would save me, and that would keep me afloat a little bit longer. That's one tip that if you haven't read this book, I would suggest reading this book in general. But that's the one tip that I was able to implement right out the gate. Has helped me a lot. Has definitely allowed me. I still needed help when I was in Dallas, and luckily I have parents. My mom especially has helped me multiple times in those moments where it's like I need to last as long as I can without asking for help. That one tip changed everything, and then I just molded it into a way that suits me and my lifestyle and just how aggressive I want to be with my savings. So you don't have to stick with just the 10% and leave it at that. Like it can evolve over time, but that's definitely a good place to start. So just wanted to go ahead and throw that out there, man. A book recommendation, as well as just one very good financial tip that I would recommend to anybody. I definitely would recommend it to young adults who don't have any major financial responsibilities just yet, if any at all. And you just need to start a good habit. You never know when extra cash is going to save you. So definitely recommend that. But I'll go ahead and leave this video off here, guys. If you have any comments, feedback, suggestions, anything like that, go ahead and leave that for me in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys in the next one.